Colonel Sarah Martinez had been living in complete anonymity for 15 years when the call came through on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. At 62, she spent her days tending to her small garden in rural Montana, her weathered hands now more familiar with soil than aircraft controls. The neighbors knew her as the quiet woman who ran the local hardware store, someone who kept to herself and never spoke about her past. They had no idea that the woman selling them screws and paintbrushes had once been one of the most decorated pilots in Air Force history. Sarah's military career had ended abruptly in 2008 under circumstances that remained classified. Official records showed she had retired honorably after 25 years of service. But those who knew the truth understood that her departure was anything but voluntary. She had been involved in a top-secret mission over hostile territory that went catastrophically wrong, resulting in the loss of civilian lives and creating an international incident that the government desperately wanted to bury. To protect national security and diplomatic relations, Sarah's entire service record was scrubbed from public databases, her commendations sealed, and her very existence as a military hero erased from history. The weight of carrying such secrets had nearly broken her. Sarah had saved countless lives during her career, flying dangerous rescue missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, leading humanitarian airdrops in disaster zones, and training the next generation of pilots. She had been recommended for the Medal of Honor twice, though those recommendations now existed only in classified files that would never see daylight. Instead of recognition, she received a modest pension and a new identity in a small town where no one would ask questions about her past. Her days followed a predictable routine that helped keep the nightmares at bay. She opened the hardware store at 7 each morning, helped customers find what they needed, balanced the books, and closed at 6. Evenings were spent reading, working in her garden, or taking long walks through the Montana countryside. She had learned to find peace in the simple rhythm of civilian life, though the silence sometimes felt heavier than the roar of jet engines she once commanded. The phone call that shattered her carefully constructed quiet life came from Colonel James Rodriguez, her former squadron leader, and one of the few people who knew her real location. His voice carried an urgency that immediately transported her back to the cockpit of her F-16, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. A commercial airliner carrying 180 passengers had lost all communication and was flying erratically over the Pacific Ocean. Air traffic control had lost radar contact, and military jets scrambled to intercept had found the aircraft flying in dangerous patterns that suggested the crew was incapacitated or the plane's systems had been compromised. Rodriguez explained that initial attempts to establish contact had failed completely. The airliner was now heading toward a major city on the West Coast, and military commanders were facing the unthinkable decision of whether to shoot down a civilian aircraft to prevent a potential catastrophe. However, one of the intercepting pilots had managed to get close enough to see into the cockpit windows and notice something that changed everything. The pilot reported seeing a woman in the captain's seat who was clearly conscious, but appeared to be signaling in a pattern that seemed deliberate and coded. The pattern she was using was something taught only in advanced military survival schools, a communication method that Sarah herself had developed during her years training elite pilots for hostile territory operations. It was a complex series of hand signals designed to convey critical information when radio communication was impossible or compromised. The intercepting pilot recognized it as military in origin, but couldn't decode the specific message. Only a handful of people in the world would understand what the woman in that cockpit was trying to communicate, and Sarah Martinez was one of them. Rodriguez's voice cracked slightly as he explained that they needed her expertise immediately. The airliner was now less than 2 hours from reaching populated areas, and conventional rescue attempts had exhausted all options. The woman in the cockpit was their only hope of understanding what was happening aboard that aircraft and potentially preventing a disaster that could claim hundreds of lives on the ground. Despite the government's efforts to erase her from history, Sarah's unique knowledge and experience made her the only person who could decode what might be their last chance at saving everyone aboard. As Sarah listened to the details, her hands began to shake slightly, not from fear but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once made her one of the most effective pilots in the Air Force. She had thought those days were behind her forever, that her skills would rust away in the quiet corners of her Montana retirement. But hearing about people in danger, about a situation where her knowledge could make the difference between life and death, awakened something in her that 15 years of hiding couldn't diminish. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same government that had erased her achievements and forced her into obscurity was now desperately seeking her help. She could have refused, could have hung up the phone and continued her peaceful existence selling hardware to ranchers and farmers. But Sarah Martinez had never been able to walk away from people in need. And that fundamental part of her character remained unchanged despite everything she had endured. Rodriguez was calling from Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado, where a crisis management team had assembled to coordinate the response to the hijacked or disabled airliner. He explained that they had a helicopter standing by that could reach her location in Montana within 40 minutes and transport her directly to the base. From there, she would be connected via secure video link to the intercepting aircraft so she could observe the woman's signals in real time and hopefully decode the message that might save 180 lives. Sarah realized that accepting this mission would likely expose her location and compromise the anonymity she had worked so hard to maintain. Government officials who had spent 15 years pretending she didn't exist would suddenly remember her value, and there would undoubtedly be consequences for breaking her silence. But as she listened to Rodriguez describe the desperate situation unfolding thousands of miles away, she knew that some things were more important than personal safety or maintaining cover. The decision came to her with the same clarity that had guided her through countless dangerous missions during her military career. Without hesitation, she told Rodriguez she would be ready when the helicopter arrived. As she hung up the phone and looked around her small, quiet store, Sarah Martinez knew that her days as the forgotten hardware store owner were about to end. Whatever happened next, the woman who had once been one of America's greatest pilots was about to step back into the light, ready to use her skills one more time to save lives and prove that true heroes never really retire. The helicopter arrived exactly 40 minutes later, its rotors churning up dust from the gravel parking lot behind Sarah's hardware store. She had spent those precious minutes gathering the few personal items that might be useful and mentally preparing herself to re-enter a world she had left behind 15 years ago. As the aircraft lifted off from Montana, carrying her toward Peterson Air Force Base, Sarah watched her quiet life disappear below the clouds and wondered if she would ever see her peaceful garden again. The flight to Colorado gave her time to process what Rodriguez had told her about the crisis unfolding over the Pacific. The commercial airliner, Flight 447 from Tokyo to Los Angeles, had been in the air for 8 hours when it suddenly deviated from its planned route and stopped responding to air traffic control. Military satellites had tracked its erratic flight pattern, which included several unexplained altitude changes and course corrections that suggested either serious technical malfunctions or some form of hijacking that had gone wrong. Upon arriving at Peterson Air Force Base, Sarah was immediately escorted to a secure command center, where dozens of military personnel and civilian experts were working frantically to resolve the crisis. The atmosphere was tense, filled with the urgent chatter of radio communications and the constant clicking of computer keyboards as specialists analyzed every piece of available data about the wayward aircraft. Large screens displayed the airliner's current position, weather conditions, fuel estimates, and potential flight paths toward major population centers. General Patricia Wells, the base commander, briefed Sarah on everything they knew about the situation. The intercepting F-16 pilots had managed to establish visual contact with the airliner and confirmed that while the aircraft appeared structurally intact, something was clearly wrong inside the cockpit. Through powerful telescopic equipment, they could see that the original flight crew was incapacitated or missing, and a woman who appeared to be a passenger had taken control of the aircraft. This woman was systematically performing hand signals that the military pilots recognized as coded communication, but couldn't interpret. Sarah studied the video feeds from the intercepting aircraft with the same intense focus she had once brought to analyzing enemy positions during combat missions. The woman in the cockpit was clearly under enormous stress, but her signals were deliberate and precise. She repeated the same sequence of hand gestures every few minutes, suggesting she understood that someone might be watching and trying to communicate vital information about the situation aboard the aircraft. As Sarah analyzed the woman's movements, memories of her years developing and teaching advanced survival communication techniques came flooding back. During her time as an instructor at the Air Force Academy, She had created this particular signaling system for pilots who might find themselves in hostile territory with compromised radio equipment. The hand signals were designed to convey complex information quickly and clearly, using movements that would be difficult for enemies to detect or interpret but unmistakable to trained military personnel. Decoding the woman's message required Sarah to remember not just the basic signals but the specific variations and combinations that indicated different types of emergencies. Each gesture had multiple meanings depending on its context and the signals that preceded or followed it. After 20 minutes of careful observation, Sarah began to understand the horrifying story the woman was trying to tell through those desperate hand movements. The decoded message revealed that Flight 447 had been the target of a sophisticated terrorist attack that had gone catastrophically wrong. According to the woman's signals, several armed hijackers had taken control of the aircraft shortly after it left Japanese airspace, but something had happened during the takeover that resulted in the terrorists being incapacitated or killed. The woman indicated that she was a former military pilot who had recognized the danger and managed to gain access to the cockpit, but she also signaled that the aircraft's navigation and communication systems had been severely damaged during the struggle. More critically, her signals indicated that there were explosive devices somewhere aboard the aircraft that the terrorists had intended to detonate over Los Angeles. The woman had discovered the bombs but couldn't disarm them because she lacked the technical expertise, and the devices appeared to be on some kind of timer or remote trigger system. She was trying to keep the aircraft away from populated areas, while desperately hoping that someone would understand her coded messages and send help before the explosives detonated or the plane's fuel ran out. Sarah's analysis sent shockwaves through the command center. The situation was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had initially realized. Not only were 180 passengers and crew members in immediate danger, but if the aircraft reached Los Angeles with active explosives aboard, the resulting catastrophe could claim thousands of additional lives on the ground. The woman's heroic efforts to maintain control and communicate the threat had bought them time, but the window for action was closing rapidly. General Wells immediately contacted the Pentagon to relay Sarah's findings and request authorization for an emergency rescue operation. However, the logistics of safely boarding a moving aircraft thousands of feet above the Pacific Ocean while dealing with potential explosives presented challenges that pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible. Standard hijacking response protocols were useless in this situation because the hijackers were apparently dead or incapacitated, and conventional bomb disposal procedures couldn't be implemented on a moving aircraft with damaged communication systems. Sarah found herself at the center of planning sessions, where military strategists, explosives experts, and aviation specialists worked together to develop a rescue plan that had never been attempted before. Her knowledge of the woman's signaling capabilities became crucial for coordinating any rescue attempt, as traditional radio communication remained impossible. She would need to develop a way to communicate back to the woman, using visual signals that could be transmitted from the intercepting aircraft. The rescue plan that emerged was both audacious and extremely dangerous. A specially trained bomb disposal team would be inserted onto the moving airliner using a modified aerial refueling technique that had never been used for human transport. The team would parachute from a military transport aircraft onto the commercial airliner's fuselage, then use specialized equipment to cut through the aircraft's hull and access the passenger compartment. Meanwhile, Sarah would coordinate with the woman in the cockpit through a complex series of light signals transmitted from the intercepting F-16 seconds. As preparations for this unprecedented rescue operation moved into high gear, Sarah realized that her involvement had already attracted attention from government officials who had spent years trying to keep her existence secret. Several men in expensive suits had arrived at the base and were having intense conversations with General Wells about the political ramifications of using a officially non-existent former pilot to coordinate a high-profile rescue mission. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone involved. The same woman whose heroic military service had been erased from official records was now the key to preventing what could become one of the worst terrorist attacks in American history. Sarah understood that her emergence from anonymity would have consequences far beyond this single mission, but she also knew that 180 innocent people were counting on her expertise to survive the next few hours. With less than 60 minutes of fuel remaining aboard the endangered airliner and the rescue team preparing for their death-defying insertion attempt, Sarah took her position at the communication station that would allow her to guide both the woman in the cockpit and the bomb disposal specialists through the most complex aerial rescue operation ever attempted. As she prepared to transmit her first coded light signal to the aircraft, she felt the familiar calm focus that had made her such an effective pilot during her military career. Whatever happened next, Sarah Martinez was ready to prove once again that some heroes never truly retire. The rescue operation began with a precision that reflected years of military training and Sarah's expert coordination from the Ground Command Center. Using powerful spotlights mounted on the intercepting F-16 seconds, she transmitted a series of coded light patterns to the woman in the cockpit, establishing two-way communication for the first time since the crisis began. The woman's response signals confirmed that she understood the rescue plan and was prepared to maintain steady flight, while the bomb disposal team attempted their dangerous insertion onto the moving aircraft. Captain Lisa Chen, the former Air Force pilot who had taken control of Flight 447, had been a passenger traveling home from a military consultation in Japan when the terrorist attack began. Her quick thinking and combat training had saved the aircraft from immediate disaster, but she had been flying solely on instruments for over an hour, while trying to decode the damaged navigation systems and avoid populated areas. Sarah's light signals were the first sign that her desperate attempts at communication had been successful, and she responded with visible relief that someone finally understood the magnitude of the crisis. The aerial insertion team consisted of 4 specialists: Master Sergeant Mike Torres, the team's explosives expert; Technical Sergeant Janet Kim, a communications specialist; Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes, a medical technician; and Senior Airman David Park, their entry systems operator. These 4 individuals would attempt something that had never been done before in military history: parachuting from a C-130 transport aircraft onto the roof of a commercial airliner flying at 25,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. As the C-130 approached the endangered airliner from above, Sarah maintained constant communication with both aircraft through her coded light signals. She guided Captain Chen through a series of subtle course adjustments that positioned Flight 447 inches, the optimal location for the insertion team's approach, while simultaneously coordinating with the C-130's crew to ensure perfect timing for the dangerous maneuver. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, as even small miscalculations could result in the insertion team missing the aircraft entirely or colliding with it catastrophically. The first phase of the insertion went flawlessly, with all 4 team members successfully landing on the airliner's fuselage and quickly securing themselves with specialized magnetic anchor systems. However, once they began cutting through the aircraft's hull to access the passenger compartment, they discovered that the situation inside was even more complex than anyone had anticipated. The terrorists had not only planted explosive devices, but had also released some kind of incapacitating gas into the cabin's air system, leaving most passengers unconscious and creating additional dangers for the rescue team. Master Sergeant Torres quickly located the primary explosive device hidden in the aircraft's cargo hold, but his analysis revealed that the bomb was far more sophisticated than intelligence reports had suggested. The device was connected to multiple trigger mechanisms, including altitude sensors, timer circuits, and what appeared to be a dead man's switch that would activate if certain conditions weren't met. Disarming it would require precise technical knowledge and steady hands while working in the cramped, pressurized environment of a moving aircraft. Meanwhile, Staff Sergeant Hayes discovered that several passengers were in critical medical condition due to prolonged exposure to the incapacitating gas. Without immediate treatment, some of them would not survive even if the explosive threat was neutralized. This added another layer of urgency to an already desperate situation, as the team now had to save lives while simultaneously preventing a potential catastrophic explosion over one of America's largest cities. Sarah found herself coordinating an increasingly complex operation from thousands of miles away, using her light signal system to relay critical information between Captain Chen, the insertion team, and the intercepting aircraft. Her role evolved from simple translator to tactical coordinator, as she helped orchestrate the delicate balance of maintaining stable flight, while the specialists worked frantically to neutralize the explosive devices and treat the injured passengers. The breakthrough came when Technical Sergeant Kim managed to restore partial communication systems aboard the aircraft, allowing direct radio contact with the ground command center for the first time since the crisis began. Captain Chen's voice, strained but determined, provided crucial details about the terrorists' methods and the location of additional explosive devices that the insertion team hadn't yet discovered. Her information revealed that the attack had been far more extensive than anyone realized, with multiple bombs placed throughout the aircraft and backup detonation systems designed to ensure catastrophic destruction, even if the primary devices were discovered. As Master Sergeant Torres worked to disarm the explosives, Sarah coordinated with explosives experts at Peterson Air Force Base to analyze the bomb's construction and develop the safest approach for neutralizing each component. The process required incredible precision, as cutting the wrong wire or disturbing certain sensors could trigger immediate detonation. Torres had to work by feel in many cases, as the cramped conditions and poor lighting made visual inspection difficult, relying on Sarah's relay of technical guidance from ground-based experts who couldn't see the actual devices. With the aircraft now running dangerously low on fuel and less than 30 minutes from reaching Los Angeles airspace, the rescue team achieved a critical breakthrough. Torres successfully disarmed the primary explosive device, while Kim and Hayes located and neutralized 2 additional bombs that had been hidden in the passenger cabin. However, their relief was short-lived when Captain Chen reported that the aircraft's damaged navigation systems were causing automatic course corrections that were pulling them directly toward Los Angeles International Airport, where thousands of people would be at risk if any explosives remained active. The final phase of the rescue operation required Sarah to coordinate a controlled emergency landing, while the insertion team completed their search for any remaining explosive devices. Captain Chen, despite her extensive piloting experience, had never attempted to land a damaged commercial airliner with compromised navigation systems, and she would need constant guidance from ground control to execute a safe approach to a suitable airport. Sarah worked with air traffic controllers and aviation experts to identify the best landing location and develop approach procedures that would account for the aircraft's damaged systems. Edwards Air Force Base in California emerged as the optimal landing site. With its long runways and specialized emergency response capabilities. However, getting Flight 447 to Edwards would require Captain Chen to manually override the damaged navigation systems while maintaining precise altitude and speed, despite the aircraft's tendency to drift off course. Sarah's light signals became crucial once again, providing course corrections and landing guidance when radio communication proved unreliable due to the damage sustained during the terrorist attack. The landing itself was a testament to both Captain Chen's skill as a pilot and Sarah's expertise as a coordinator. Despite crosswinds, damaged flight controls, and the ongoing medical emergency aboard the aircraft, Chen managed to bring Flight 447 down safely at Edwards Air Force Base. Emergency medical teams were standing by to treat the affected passengers, while bomb disposal experts conducted a final sweep of the aircraft to ensure that all explosive devices had been successfully neutralized. As news of the successful rescue operation spread, Sarah found herself facing the consequences of emerging from her 15-year anonymity. Media outlets, government officials, and military leaders who had spent years pretending she didn't exist suddenly wanted to know everything about the woman who had coordinated one of the most complex aerial rescue operations in aviation history. The same skills and knowledge that had once made her a liability to be hidden away had now made her a hero to be celebrated. However, Sarah's thoughts were not on personal recognition or the political ramifications of her return to public attention. As she watched the passengers being safely evacuated from Flight 447, she felt the same quiet satisfaction that had sustained her through 25 years of military service. These were the moments that made all the sacrifices worthwhile, when training and experience came together to save lives and prevent tragedy. In the weeks that followed the rescue, Sarah learned that Captain Chen's quick thinking and heroic actions had prevented what intelligence analysts later determined would have been one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in American history. The explosives aboard Flight 447 had been powerful enough to level several city blocks, and the planned detonation over Los Angeles could have killed thousands of people on the ground, in addition to the 180 passengers and crew members aboard the aircraft. The government officials who had once worked so hard to erase Sarah's existence found themselves in the awkward position of having to explain how a officially non-existent former pilot had become the key to preventing a national catastrophe. Her story became a powerful reminder that true heroism doesn't fade with age or retirement, and that the skills and dedication that make someone valuable to their country don't disappear just because their official service has ended. Sarah Martinez never did return to her quiet hardware store in Montana. Instead, she found herself recruited by a joint task force focused on preventing similar attacks and training the next generation of crisis response specialists. Her unique combination of piloting expertise, tactical knowledge, and communication skills made her invaluable in developing new protocols for handling complex aerial emergencies. The woman who had been forgotten by history had not only saved 180 lives but had also helped reshape how America prepares for and responds to airborne terrorist threats. The story of Flight 447 became a classified case study, taught at military academies and emergency response training centers around the world. Though Sarah's role remained largely secret for security reasons, she had learned to find satisfaction in knowing that her contributions were making aviation safer for everyone, even if the general public would never know her name or understand the full extent of her service to the country she had never stopped protecting.